afternoon, everyone. We're veering away once again from the political stuff because no matter how terrible things get, it is still possible for great fiction to lift our spirits, gives us a shot of that much needed serotonin. And I want to go back to my 1930s project. So, last time I talked about my 10 favorite horror movies of the 1930s, and that was pretty easy because all of those were fairly short films that I've seen multiple times. Well, to make this next set of videos, next pair, I had to do a little research. I had to rewatch a couple of things. So here, finally, are my 10 favorite action adventure films. Now, the reason this was hard is because sometimes action adventure bleeds into other genres. You know, where are you going to put it? Where are you going to put certain films? One movie that is dear to my heart in an action adventure kind of way is 1940's The Thief of Baghdad. 1 year too late for the 30s project, but how would I class something like that? It would be a fantasy film, and it would have to go under best SFF films of what will eventually be the 1940s, because I'm going to do them too. And then there are movies like A Tale of Two Cities, Mutiny on the Bounty. Those I'm saving for my top 10 historical films of the 1930s. So what could I put purely in the action adventure slot? At number 10, and a lot of these movies are very much flawed, and none of these movies are absolutely perfect, except I could possibly make a case for my top 3. We'll be getting to that momentarily. But at number 10, I have 1934's The Scarlet Pimpernel, starring Leslie Howard, Merle Oberon, and Raymond Massey giving a really wonderful performance as the villain of the piece. So this movie tells the story. It's based on a novel by a woman named Baroness Orczy, Orczy. I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but it tells the story of an Englishman who takes it upon himself to rescue aristocrats from the guillotine during the French Revolution. And many have pointed to this as a proto-superhero story because you have an Englishman with a secret identity. He pretends to be very much a fop and a weakling, and at the same time he adopts various disguises to free these aristocrats from the clutches of the guillotine. And you also have a villain going head to head with him. This is Raymond Massey again. I think as good as Leslie Howard is, and people who only know him from Gone with the Wind don't really know him at all, but as good as he is, I honestly, when I rewatched this for research purposes prior to making this video, it was Massey I couldn't take my eyes off of. He's got one of those rugged, long, lean faces and a deep voice, and he's just... I understand now, having watched it again, why when Hollywood chose to make a movie version of Arsenic and Old Lace, they couldn't get Boris Karloff to star in the movie because he was still starring on Broadway in that role, and it was a role specifically written for him because it's a homicidal maniac who commits a murder every time someone tells him he looks like Boris Karloff. So you get the joke. And obviously when they got around to making a movie version, they wanted him, but Broadway wouldn't let him go, so they had to find another actor. And they found Raymond Massey. Now I get it. I think I understand why, of all the people they could have chosen for a Boris Karloff knockoff, they got this guy. So you also have a damsel in distress who, because she's played by Merle Oberon, she has a little bit more to her than a lot of damsels in distress, but still, I mean, it is the 1930s. So even though she does bring some personality to her role, she doesn't really have all that much to do. And this movie, the biggest flaw, I would say, is the view it presents of the French Revolution. A lot of people who don't like the movie don't like it because of this. Because it presents the aristocrats as these put upon victims without ever considering why France had a revolution in the first place. So the villains, of course, are all pro revolution. You hear the Marseillaise played a few times, and of course, every time I hear that tune in the soundtrack, I think of Casablanca. But nonetheless, in this case, the people who would whistle La Marseillaise are the bad guys. And while, yes, you should make stories or write stories about the excesses of the Reign of Terror, it still helps to know that there were some pretty good reasons why the Third Estate, as they were called, the commoners, revolted in the first place. The movie only pays lip service to this idea once when Merle Oberon's backstory comes into play, that she was the victim of an aristo who abused his power. So you do get that, but it's like a blink and you'll miss it moment. So that's an objection that some people have to the movie. I still think it's worth a watch. I still think it's a lot of fun. And it deserves some credit for no other reason. If it didn't do anything else, it gave us the raw material that Looney Tunes used in the 1950s to give us the Scarlet Pumpernickel, one of the best Daffy Duck cartoons. Now, at number 9, this is one a lot of people haven't seen, and it is available on YouTube. By the way, I will be mentioning when these are available on YouTube. The Scarlet Pimpernel is, and so is my number 9 choice, which is The Man of the Iron Mask, directed by James Whale, who also directed the first 2 Frankenstein films, as well as The Invisible Man. So James Whale is best known as a horror movie director, but he's also directed a number of strong films in other genres, including The Man in the Iron Mask, which is an adaptation of Alexandre Dumas. In this case, you have the older Three Musketeers. Warren William plays D'Artagnan in this movie, and he, along with Jean-Baptiste Colbert, orchestrates a plot to have Louis XIV replaced by his twin brother Philippe, when it turns out Louis XIV is basically ruining the monarchy and bleeding France dry with his excesses. They want to replace him with a wiser, more temperate ruler. So they get his younger brother Philippe, who is played in this movie. Both he and Louis are played by Lewis Hayward, who is not a household name. He's actually a pretty underrated actor, and he does very well in this film. And because you have D'Artagnan and the Three Musketeers, you do get your share of good sword fights in this film. But it's also a compelling watch for the dual role, the double performance of Lewis Hayward. And also there's a rather sweet romantic plot involved in this, where Louis is making a political marriage with the Infanta of Spain. He treats her with contempt and flaunts his mistresses in her face. but Philippe actually falls in love with her. So, really worth a watch, particularly if you are interested in James Whale's career post Bride of Frankenstein. The eighth film, again, is available on YouTube, so you can watch it here anytime. It's called If I Were King, and it too is set in France. This is becoming a theme here, a sub theme anyway. And in this particular film, you have Louis XI, played by Basil Rathbone, putting as his second in command a street poet named Francois Villon, who's played wonderfully by one of my favorite charismatic leading men, Ronald Colman. And he does this because he overhears Villon saying that he could solve the problems besetting France in a heartbeat if only he were king. So this sets the stage for some interesting discovery and interplay between the two figures, Basil Rathbone's Louis and Ronald Colman's Villon. One of the interesting things about this movie, which was directed by Frank Lloyd, he also directed Mutiny on the Bounty, but this one has a screenplay by none other than Preston Sturges, who would become famous in the 1940s for making very different kinds of films, comedies like Sullivan's Travels and The Palm Beach Story. So it's interesting that his name is on this, and you can hear it a little bit because he does bring some of that cleverness to the writing of this particular action adventure story. You do get plenty of action scenes in this, and all the characters in this, or the main characters in this, are given an element of complexity that I could not help appreciating. So, well worth a watch if you got the time. Check it out. Again, this is another one that a lot of people haven't really heard of. If I Were King, made in 1938, starring Ronald Colman and Basil Rathbone, as well as Francis D. and Ellen Drew, who are cast as two very different women, one upper class, one lower class, who fall in love with Francois Villon. So this is where I'm going to cut things short because I see that I am running out of time, and again, I'm conscious of how much time I have with these videos. So click like and subscribe, help me grow my channel, and I will see you with part 2.